a little warning. My name is Bryce Goldstein. I'm on the Butte Environmental Council Board of Directors. And we want to thank you for coming out here tonight. Really excited to have all of you who are here in person, all of you who are here on Zoom, or who will be joining us in a minute. We have a cast of amazing speakers tonight. I'd also like to thank our sponsors for this event, Chico Naturopathic Medicine, Clean Canteen, and the Strong Foundation, who provided the grant to make these events happen. So I'm on the BEC Forums and Outreach Committee. We put together these events, and we're always looking for community members who are interested in helping us with that effort, or otherwise volunteering with that. BEC, Butte Environmental Council, is a nonprofit that's been protecting the land, air, and water of Butte County for over 45 years.
Everybody on Zoom needs to mute yourselves, please.
Awesome events, including our annual Butte Environmental Council Bidwell Park and Chico Street Cleanup, which is happening in September on the 18th and 19th. It's our 34th annual one of these cleanups. So we hope that you all will form a little team.
I got it now, I think.
Okay, it's recording. So we take a break, we can pause the recording.
If you want to sign up for the annual cleanup. October 23rd is our gala. November 13th is our fall community forum. And November 16th will be our next community forum on food systems and
It's good.
All right, welcome everybody who's watching us on Zoom. Thanks for joining us, and of course, thanks again to everybody who's here in the audience. So yeah, once again, thanks to our sponsors, thanks to everybody who's here, thanks to our awesome panelists. I'm, when she's ready, going to turn this over to Butte Environmental Council's General Manager, Kaitlyn Dalby, and she'll give a little background on this forum and why it's so important that we're here.
Hi everyone, so glad to see you here. Thanks Bryce for the intro. All right, so as Bryce mentioned, I'm Kaitlyn Dalby. Oh, and I don't like feedback. It's not. Is it on? Anyway, I'll just stop delaying here. So I'm Kaitlyn Dalby. I'm the General Manager for Butte Environmental Council. We've been doing community forums for the last few years, and I am actually pretty new to Butte Environmental Council. I joined the BEC team in January, and one of the first tasks was to set the agenda or our event calendar for the year. This forum, this Wildfire Forum, has been on the calendar since March. And so I just wanted to give you that information, not like this last minute thing that got thrown together because we're in, you know, awesome fire season already. So anyway, I guess I just wanted to say that this particular topic's really important to me, and I think it's important to everybody in this community. And obviously it's important to you, otherwise you wouldn't be here today. Can I just see a show of hands for anybody here who has been directly impacted by a wildfire, either by evacuation or having somebody in your family be evacuated? All right, so I would say that we all have been directly impacted by wildfire. How many here have been indirectly impacted by wildfire by worrying about the smoke outside and what the AQI is? All right, how about being indirectly impacted by wildfire by the housing shortage that we've seen happen since the Campfire? Yeah. So I think that the take-home message at this point is just that we all recognize that wildfire in our community here in Chico, even though we feel like maybe it's not a direct threat to this spot that I stand on, which we could definitely argue that all day, it's going to have a ripple effect through all of our communities. And so the purpose of this forum is to hear about what folks are doing now and have been doing to mitigate our wildfire threat, and what we can do as a community moving forward to build our resiliency against wildfire in the face of climate change and alongside land management policy. And so honestly, I could say a lot more, but I'm just going to jump into it because I'm not the one that you all are here to hear speak. So our first speaker today is actually, how do you say your last name? 𝘕𝗏𝙗𝙣𝙑. Okay, Dr. Sandrine 𝘕𝗏𝙗𝙣, who is a associate professor here in environmental science in the Department of Geological and Environmental Sciences. She completed her PhD in hydrological science at UC Davis, where she studied organic matter cycling in an irrigated watershed. The rest of her bio, I'm saving time here. The rest of her bio is on our social media page. And I want to say that we invited her here because she can really give that full-scale watershed perspective about what's happening in our landscape and how it relates to climate change and wildfire. So.
Right. Did you turn off that other microphone? It's getting like a monitor, a microphone, like some weird feedback. I don't know if I'm the only one that has that active in their ear, but right? Okay.
All right. Well, hi everyone. It's great to be here. Great to see a lot of friendly faces. Yeah, my name is Sandrine 𝘕𝗏𝙗𝙣𝙩. I am. I've been at Chico for 8 years now, and coming from a water quality background, I'm a water chemist by training, without wildfire research experience, and I'm going to tell you how I got thrown into it since the Campfire. So most of my work relates to the surface water quality impacts of the Campfire in particular, and it extends to obviously wildfire, but more specifically urban fires. Before I move on, a lot of this work, all this work is being done in collaboration with my colleague in civil engineering, Jack Webster, who has the wildfire research experience. And we teamed up after the Campfire due to our common interests on water quality. And so, yeah, a lot of this work was done with him with an NSF grant. So a little bit to start a little on kind of the greater context, and this is where I'll, I am definitely not an expert. I do water quality, and so lots of people, a lot of the panelists here today are way more knowledgeable than I am. So just a little background, or just to put it in the context of climate change. As we all very well know, very personally, we're all affected by these trends. They're not abstract at all anymore, with warming temperatures and later rains in the fall and the winter, and earlier snowmelt. We're seeing a much shorter winter season and a much larger or an extended drought season, and that leads to increasingly large and frequent fires. And the one graph I don't have here is that a lot of our fire.
You get a little closer to the mic, I can turn it down and it should be less feedback.
Okay, I can still do so. A lot of the vulnerability of our landscape happens to match with that wildland-urban interface. We have lots of people living in our beautiful forests, right? And just another quick intro slide here. This is a very humble map put together by one of my grad students, and it's just showing the occurrence and size of fires over the last 7 or so decades. It stopped in the 2010s, so it doesn't even include last year's fires. Hopefully you can see that there's a lot of red, a lot of orange. So over the last 2 decades, we've definitely seen larger fires, more than. And also to point out that obviously fire has been part of our history in California. It's not a new thing, but it's changing in character. Okay, so jumping to our specific case study here, the Campfire, which is definitely not an abstract thing for all of you. As you all know, the fire started in November, on November 8th, 2018. It really changed a lot of, for me, that marked the starting point of a new period of fire in California, in Northern California. And the big thing that's very overwhelming for me from this graph, this map, is to realize the spread of this fire in just 24 hours, right? All these blue-green and blue to blue-green areas. I don't need to give you too much background, but just to highlight the fact that this fire obviously started in a forested area. It burned trees. But the thing that's quite unique about this fire is that it burned over 18,000 homes, and very, very urban, not urban in the sense of we're not in downtown San Francisco, but a lot of structures burned. And it wasn't just structures, it was also cars. And so from a chemistry or pollution perspective, you know, when I look at this picture, this was a nice Volkswagen Beetle. We have an aluminum radiator. We have a lead battery or lead-containing battery. We have copper from the wiring harness. Tire contains a lot of zinc. We have steel from tire belts, and it goes on, right? So, probably has twice as many cars burnt as structures burnt in the fire. So that was a big concern of ours as far as water quality was concerned. What is this gonna do to the waters that drain from Paradise as soon as the rain starts? Another concern was the fact that Paradise still didn't have a wastewater treatment plant, right? So we were all septic based, and the septic tanks burnt. So what is that going to do to, you know, as water, as you can see on this picture, you know, runoff during a storm event will go in there and mobilize potentially pathogens and nutrients. And then finally, what was unique about the Campfire too was there are a lot of mobile home parks in Paradise, and this picture is actually from Blue Creek, but lots of mobile homes burned as well, and that potentially represented a different kind of source of pollution. So really quick, we deployed all efforts. We monitored water quality in creeks that drain from Paradise. We didn't focus on Lake Oroville. Mostly focused on what was draining into the valley. We used Big Chico Creek as our comparison watershed, the unburned watershed for this fire. And we sampled over nearly 200 different samples of different types. So every rain event, and as you probably remember, that was a wet winter following the fire. So we were busy. I'll skip, I didn't do too many pictures. Trying to go fast, but the map here shows the number of burned structures for each watershed, and so there was quite a gradient from zero in Big Chico Creek to, let's see, some of the highest in Dry Creek and Clear Creek had lots of burning in these watersheds. So let's think a little bit conceptually here. What do we know about the effect of fire on water quality? Well, when you think about the effect of a big disturbance like that, first you have to think about, okay, what do we know about the background? What was in that water before the fire? And usually that's pretty well known. We know the general geology. We have, in this case, in the case of the Campfire, there was some additional concerns with mining, lots of mine sites in the watersheds, and you have to know the land use. So that's generally well known. Although it was actually kind of hard to find some background water chemistry. So I'll show a few of those, but they're limited still in smaller watersheds like these creeks that we're talking about. So the other thing to be aware of is changes to the landscape due to the fire. This part is moderately well understood. we've had several studies doing wildfire research. So we're talking about the general impact of fire in a forest on the ecosystem. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in the next few slides. But the thing that really was unknown is what happens when you're burning an urban environment and with building materials, with electronics, with household chemicals, you know, oil in our garage and paint, and so on. So that was the big unknown and the big challenge for us. So a little bit more about what we know, or from, we, but generally as a scientific community. We know that soil and obviously all the biomass, the trees and the plants are deeply affected by burning, depending on the type of fire. But we know that soil heating is going to change the soil stability, so that's leading to more erosion usually. It also going to change carbon in the system. A lot of the carbon that was stored in plants is burnt as and released as CO2. And it's changing the nutrient content of the system as well. So that's these impacts. And then I'm just going to show it all to you. This is my most conceptual slide, sorry. So we also release metals that were stored in plants and soils, and they get oxidized, so that changes their character and their mobility. Lots of changes in the organic matter side of things. These organic molecules that were part of plants, they become completely different, and they could be carcinogenic, like dioxins if it's not too hot of a fire, or yeah, lots of changes in character. Oh, I guess that was going with the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, the PAHs. Those are the ones we don't want to drink. They're toxic to us. And so generally what we know from a fire is that as the soil burns, it becomes less stable, more erodible. And when you have large storm events following a fire, you usually see an increase in sediment concentration. And with sediment comes everything that's going to attach to the sediment and anything that's soluble too. So we usually also see an increase in nutrient concentrations in the waters after a fire. And that can lead to algal blooms and other issues. Okay, so that's that. So back to our study on the campfire, the contaminants of concern that we really tried to focus on were toxic metals, as well as organic pollutants like those PAHs, but also brominated compounds and fire retardants and dioxins. We were also concerned about the asbestos that was possibly going to be present because we have ultramafic soils in this area, which are a source of asbestos, a natural source of asbestos. And then there was the asbestos used in construction materials potentially. And finally, the sewage contamination, so nutrients as well as pathogens. So this study was huge, and we were not just the only people doing it, part of it. It included folks from Boulder, from Washington, from Clemson, all over the country. And also folks from the Water Board and DWR. So we all rallied together, kind of grouped as well, thanks to the county, from the Butte County Watershed Emergency Response Team. And here is the long list. It's 2 pages of everything we've measured collectively. So there is the pathogens with an indicator like E. coli, the PAHs, more organics, the brominated ones, the dissolved organic carbon, the nitrogen. This is the part I did, and then mercury. Mercury is a special concern, trace metals, anions, and so on. So I'm just going to show you quick highlights of what we found. And the biggest news, the biggest result we have is that nitrogen was very high, and it really clearly increased with the amount of burning. And it was so high that sometimes it was higher, that there was more nitrogen than carbon in the water. And in a creek like Butte Creek or natural water, it's always 10 times more carbon than nitrogen. And this time we saw things that were reversed. And that was kind of wild. In terms of carbon, we saw less carbon potentially, but we saw some traces of pesticides and pharmaceuticals. PCP, pentachlorophenol, was the big one. The good news is that, as you can see on the graph there, there was a flush. There was only this one time in December 2018 sample that was pretty high, not terribly high. It didn't crush records compared to urban runoff. The Seattle team was like, that looks like urban runoff in Seattle. And but it was done pretty quickly. After that, we didn't see much of it. So that's the other complex and somewhat good news. There are some silver lining in there. Is that metal concentrations did increase compared to background levels, several orders of magnitude, but they rarely exceeded the environmental screening levels. So that means, yes, there was an impact, a significant impact on metal concentrations in the creeks, but we never reached a point where we were frying the ecosystem. So there's a good thing about having beautiful creeks to start with. And total mercury, we didn't find much mercury. So that was also really good news. And definitely no toxic mercury. So finishing up here, thank you for going through the slides quickly with me. I think it's an interesting, this is also preliminary. The good news is that we never saw the catastrophic contamination that we feared. We are seeing an increase, and it's kind of mind-blowing that the system could recover so quickly. And obviously, there's lots of follow-up thoughts on this, but thanks.
Thank you very much, Sandrine. That was awesome. For anybody who showed up since I welcomed you all, my name is Bryce. I'm on the Butte Environmental Council Board of Directors. So thanks for being here. After our next speaker, we're going to have a Q&A session, and then a little break, and then even more speakers. So what I'm saying is hold on to your questions. You'll get to ask them. I'm going to try to adjust this microphone really quick. And I'll introduce our next speaker. Sorry, Kevin, I know you're just cringing as I try to do this. I swear sometimes I try music, I have to adjust it. Well, I think I'll adjust. Council. She has helped to implement dozens of forest health and wildfire safety projects through collaborations with diverse local organizations and agencies. She also has participated in the completion of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, Local Hazard Mitigation Plan, various community evacuation plans, as well as other landscape level initiatives. So come on up here, Calli-Jane.
Perfect height. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I'm so glad I'm not across the creek. I was worried my voice wouldn't travel. So I do have a packet for you all that will be distributed here as I'm speaking. I really was hoping to do slides and not sure if they would show well. So instead, we're just going to go with this paper version. So do I have packets?
I will get them.
We can do it.
Somebody's taking responsibility for it. It's not me.
All right, so in preparing to speak with you tonight, I was just really encouraged in talking about the solutions side of our wildfire situation here in our communities and of course the North State. And so I'm an alumni here at Chico State. I have a master's in the geography department and love to do analog sort of education with handouts, which is why you're getting a packet tonight. And so we'll go over some of the things in the packet together, and then we'll also just talk about some of these themes in the vein of solutions and ways that we can look at some positive activity. So we're just going to use this as the table of contents for the conversation, and ladies, feel free to give me a 5-minute heads up so you don't go too long. As far as what do we need to know? There are so many aspects of the wildfire issue And what we wanted to share tonight is some of the things you'll be seeing around the community. We just launched a Be Ready Butte media campaign, so you'll be seeing some billboards and things directing folks to the website to get more information about Ready, Set, Go and other types of things that we hear from Calfire that are really essential to life safety and community safety. And then you are some of the first people to get to hold the Forest Health Guidebook. We just got the delivery last week, and we encourage you to help distribute this. If you just fall in love with this little booklet and you think of a coffee shop or a place you frequent and you wish they had a copy too, we have many, many boxes. And so later this evening, you will be hearing Wolfgang Rougle speak, and she is my co-author, along with many other great agencies and editors who helped put this booklet together. So one of the things I would highlight in here toward the back is some of the topic about biochar, and that's something that we don't get into a whole lot in our conversations. We go over forest thinning and pile burning and prescribed fire, but I would just give you a tantalizing thought to explore what biochar might mean in a landscape that you would have opportunity to influence. Also, we have a student curriculum that's been updated. For those of you who are interested in youth outreach education, we will be launching that this coming semester with 3 pilot programs. It's been around for many, many years, and we're looking forward to just collaborating through Chico State and others on providing a forum for wildfire youth education. So if anyone has a passion for that, know that we could join in. We also anticipate that youth conversation going into was going to be a conference this September, but now we've just heard today they're scheduling it for Sacramento in October. So looking to see how we can leverage that. We're also going to be partnering on a rebuilding and fire safety Ridge Expo, November 14th. And of course, a lot of the things that we hear about are home hardening, making sure structures can survive embers, and there'll be a lot of really good emphasis on that. And then each year, as Beck does, we hold an annual event, and ours is the Wildfire Safety Summit. We would encourage you to mark your calendar. Hopefully we can have an in-person meeting. We usually try to do tamales or something fun, but if we have to, it'll be by Zoom. So no tamales, we'll see. Okay, so what can you do to help friends and neighbors if you are living out in the wildland urban interface, or even if you're here in Chico, in the heart of the urban zone? We want to make sure you can tell folks about these programs. So we have a flyer for the no-cost chipper program. So beautiful, and this program was designed about 18 years ago as a free service to incentivize folks who are doing their defensible space so that firefighters can help protect their homes, that they could survive there. And right now we have funding. It's always a catch me if we can to write the grants and get the funding there, but we've been doing lots of chipping in communities like Cohasset and Bush Ranch and Berry Creek and so forth. We also are doing a lot of forest thinning projects. There are evacuation plans available on the Butte County Office of Emergency Management website, as well as on ours. And then we've recently started grazing. So we have a contractor on the Ridge in Paradise who can bring in about 300 head of goats or sheep, and the herder and the fencing and the guard dogs. And so we're launching that program on the Ridge in Miguel. And of course, we see grazing here in Bidwell Park. We just see Mountain Engine Stopper Park, and we've seen that in Ecological Reserve. So really looking forward to having more success with that. Some of you may be aware of the invasive plant called broom, Scotch broom and French broom. So we have a lending program at our office in Paradise to rent those. Well, it's really just putting a deposit down, so there's no rental charge for the tool, and they are very useful, but not in the dry part of summer. Wait for that so the moist enough. And then, of course, helping folks who can't do that brush cutting and roadside clearing, we have a program for that. And, unfortunately, we've had to switch into a recovery mode to help cut trees that are dead and pose a risk to people's structures and roads in both Paradise, Magalia, Palm Cow, and then the North Complex with Berry Creek. So that's unfortunately a program that we run too. Okay, so next question is, how does this grassroots community fire safety happen. And a lot of it has been over many, many years working with people in the community who is passionate, and they join their local neighbors to form their own fire safe councils and this other entity called Firewise Community. And so if you know someone who really wishes to be making a change in their community, there are others waiting to connect with them. And so this list shows you kind of who's who. Right now we have the Little Chico Creek Fire Safe Council here in the outskirts of Chico, and we anticipate probably a few more fire council activities forming around Chico itself. 5 minutes. Thank you. And how does all this work get done? So we do a lot of collaboration with partners, including developing plans. I mentioned the Community Wildfire Protection Plan and the county task force. So if anyone's interested in planning side, there's an opportunity there. And then what is good to read? So if you're interested in forestry, we have some great forest management plans that have been developed over the years and that are still being developed currently. And if you're really feeling motivated, the call to action, how could you get involved? We have some great committees that meet monthly, and those are revolving around firewise education, youth, biomass, for strike fire, grazing, mapping, and just the opportunity to volunteer, get involved. If you want to join the mailing list, we keep you up to date. And then there's a little bit about who we are as a nonprofit, serving the community since 1998. And what's fun about all of this? Well, Wildfire Radio Raccoon is really fun. So you get to see him here. He has his own music video that was debuted this summer, and it's on our website. It's very catchy, and Wildfire Radio Raccoon is available. Whoever in the mode of hosting an event you'd like him to come, he's bookable. And yes, so as all nonprofits, we're always looking for volunteers and members. And thank you so much for your time this evening. Look forward to any questions you might have.
Yay.
Thank you, Calli-Jane. Awesome. So we're going to move into a quick Q&A with our first 2 speakers, if you don't mind coming back up. And we'll have some audience questions, and I'll be here to repeat them back to you all because we don't have a microphone. And we probably have some questions from people on the Zoom too. So put those in the chat unless Kaitlyn already instructed you. Cool. So yeah, if you're on the Zoom, you can enter your questions in the chat. And I guess you can start raising your hands if you have a question for the first 2 panelists here. Oh, I see a question right there.
Question about, sorry, I don't want to mispronounce your last name. Testing of the water quality of Paradise Irrigation District. I had some concern shortly after the fire. I'm wondering if ongoing testing is underway and what was found out.
Okay, do you want me to?
Yeah, if you could come up here, kind of summarize the question and answer it, that'd be awesome.
So the question was about the Paradise Irrigation District water testing and water quality. And that's something I didn't acknowledge because it wasn't part of our scope, but I should have, because it was definitely one of the biggest issues. So this was the municipal water, right? The drinking water for homes in Paradise. And it was definitely very much affected by the fire because of the burning of the infrastructure, right? The pipes that burned, a lot of them were plastic, and the burning of plastic made those volatile organic compounds, those VOCs. Benzene is one of them, easy to measure one, but it's a whole list. And so there was very clear and very impactful. I mean, the levels were really high, and so for months there was a do not drink order as they were testing the whole system, flushing it, and replacing a lot of pipes. And so I forget the timing, but someone can jump in and help me out. But it was several months, probably 8 months or maybe less than a year until things were rebuilt. And I believe that the water is all good to go now. The nice thing is the source water in Lake Paradise was never problematic. So that water was clean. It was just the infrastructure. Really. So yeah, it took some time, and it was a big impact. And it wasn't, I was focusing more on the environmental impact. So that's, but there were teams of researchers on it too. Thanks.
Another question for you on Zoom, from Zoom. Is it irresponsible to set up a groundwater recharge basin at an orchard, given the contaminants that are running off the fires? Will a recharge basin negatively impact groundwater?
Do you want me to repeat them?
Yes.
Is it irresponsible to set up a groundwater recharge system in an orchard in the valley, given what we know? I would say no. I think we're fine. We'd never really. We saw an impact, but I think the biggest impact is, and that's something I didn't get to highlight too much, but it was particle, I think most of the contaminants stayed stuck on sediment, and that's a follow-up study we're doing. I think probably a lot of that sediment moved through pretty quickly. The other thing I wanted to highlight it connects well with Calli-Jane's mention of biochar. Fire has this pretty amazing ability to make biochar, which can clean the water. That's your Brita filter. And I think a lot of the good news that I had is linked to the fact that there was this ability of the fire to clean itself. So as far as the groundwater is concerned, there is some ongoing groundwater sampling in Paradise, and that was happening also right after the fire by DWR, Department of Water Resources. I think down in the valley, there's very little connection between the two, or it will take years. There is no evidence of terrible water quality at the surface level, and soils are wonderful at cleaning up things as well. So go for it.
Any further Zoom questions, or should we take one from the audience?
Okay. Who has a question here? Anybody? Oh, I see one in the corner. You can come down here, Maggie, or I'll go up there and I'll repeat it.
You want me to answer it? You can quickly summarize and answer if you don't mind.
All right, so the question is, can people bring sheep and goats to contribute to the grazing effort? We haven't explored that particular model, but sure, I would say let's give it a try. We're open to new things.
Another question? Oh, okay. Question for Calli-Jane.
A lot of the fire safe information that I see is typically for homeowners and property owners, and I'm wondering for areas that are economically lower. Sorry, I lost my language as soon as I said it. Disadvantaged. Thank you. I'm wondering how this information can be adapted to renters, to folks that live in trailer parks, to folks that may have a tiny home or a trailer on a piece of property. How can they be fire safe, and what does that outreach look like for that community?
Great. So the question is, how can we help reach folks who are not just property owners and homeowners, but who are still living in these areas that have high fire risk, maybe in a trailer or maybe in a tiny house, something like that. So all of these concepts are still applicable. The main thing is the first 5 feet around the structure and the structure itself, as far as vulnerability to embers during the wildfire. The rest of these concepts about thinning the forest and selecting native plants to place around your yard and all of those things may be more applicable to someone who has control over the forest and the yard space. But anyone can take responsibility for those vulnerable places where embers get in, gutters and eaves and vents and under stairs and decks. And that's very empowering, because you walk around and you would imagine matches just falling out of the sky to land, right next to your house as their dead grass leaves, dry wood, and that's something that anyone can do. We're used to vacuuming and doing dishes, but we're not necessarily used to walking on the perimeter of our living space and assessing it for fire hazards, but anyone can do that, and it is very empowering. Thank you.
We're about out of time for the first Q&A unless someone has a burning quick question.
Don't say burning.
I think.
Pun intended?
Oh, yeah, no pun intended, sorry. I do see one way back there. If you can make it quick, I'll try to repeat it.
Okay, so we do have amazing Cohasset forest management plan being developed. We're going to be meeting tomorrow with Wolfie and the forester to really polish up the final details. But what we're hoping to do there is create a community consciousness over how to manage the forest, because everyone owns different sized parcels. But when it comes to actual evacuation and what roads are safe to travel, unfortunately, that gets called by the sheriff during an incident. You know, there's a lot of issues around Ponderosa Way being blocked. But the more important part of the plan will be to address what do we want that forest to look like in 20 years? How do we ensure that it doesn't burn the way that other forests in Butte County have burned? And so that plan will be posted on our website. We'll be seeing a press release, I would imagine, up 2 weeks. Thanks for the question.
Thank you for the answer.
All right, can we quickly give it up for our panelists who just spoke? Right now, so that you can all get your water, maybe use the bathroom. I don't know where that is. Maybe talk to somebody you haven't seen in a while. And then we're gonna come right back in 5 minutes, and we're gonna make sure that we have time to hear from all of our next panelists. But also make sure that you've signed in. You can visit the Beck tent up there to sign in. There's water refills. You can check out our merch. You can become a Beck member, learn about our Beck programs and upcoming events. And you can take our attendee feedback survey during the break or later. So take a little break, but stick around. We have a lot more awesome talking to come up. Thank you.
They can't see.
All right, everyone, we're gonna bring it back in. Do I need to use my voice a little bit more? More than the microphone?
Pull it down at the base.
You're probably fine if you all right, so we're about to move into the second phase of tonight's presentations. In this set of speakers, we have 3 speakers coming up, and then another Q&A session, and then we'll bring it all together with all the presenters who are still here. I also wanted to just add You know, we talk a lot about the campfire because everybody's impacted by the campfire. And we affect immediately when the campfire happened. But we also found last year's more complex fire really affected those folks in our county and surrounding region. And of course, still going on is the mega fire that is the Dixie Fire this year. I grew up in Chester. My whole family's from Chester, Western and Greenville. And so the Dixie Fire has really affected me this summer. Having been evacuated for 10 days from Forest Ranch during the campfire, it's been traumatic. This summer, experiencing that, my folks came and stayed with me for the last few weeks. And you know, we're all living this reality that just isn't in an ideal world for us. Growing up in Chester, I remember, I think it was 2001, and I'm sure Dawn or Zeke will correct me if I'm wrong, that the Story Fire happened up in Columbus County. And I remember, because I was a high schooler then, that fire was massive. And we were just shocked at the size of this fire. And that fire was slightly more than 65,000 acres. I'm going to be corrected, but I'm pretty close. And now we're seeing that size of land burning in a day. And in the last 20 years have been the biggest 17 largest wildfires in California, 17 or 18. I stopped paying attention a few weeks ago because I just couldn't keep up with the data anymore. Thanks to Zeke for summarizing all of it, because that's about as much as I could consume. But I think that we have seen a shift, even as people who maybe don't have the science background. And so I think it's important that every citizen pays attention to the changes that are taking place, and that we do start to understand as best as we can what needs to happen to make it better. And that's why we're here today. So I just wanted to recap that. So our next speaker is Wolfie Rugel. Wolfie is a prescribed burn association coordinator for Butte County Resource Conservation District. Bio says, as a small farmer surrounded by blue oak woodland, Wolfie became fascinated by the interdependence between humans, fire, and oaks. Her search for fire knowledge led to a master's in public administration from CSU Chico, joining the staff of the Butte County Resource Conservation District and serving as its first prescribed burn association coordinator. Wolfie believes everyone can contribute to the central human task of keeping lands resilient, biodiverse, and bountiful.
Thank you, Kaitlyn. Thanks everybody for coming. Everybody out there in TV land. Yeah, thanks for asking me to come talk about prescribed fire today. I think most of us know by now that the mega fire crisis that we find ourselves in, that Kaitlyn was just talking about, has a lot of factors that go into it. Climate change is absolutely a factor. The way that we live and build in the wildland urban interface now is absolutely a factor. The way we use the land is absolutely a factor. And also this century by now of fire suppression that we've engaged in is definitely a factor. So, you know, when I was growing up and in high school and in college, I would always hear, well, you know, the land, fire is good, the land should burn. We're gonna put more fire back in the forests and in the Sierras and stuff. And we figured it out. We're gonna take care of it now. Like, we made mistakes, we suppressed fire. We didn't do what the Indians were doing, but like, we got it. And I was like, oh great, I got it, cool. And then I moved out to the hills, not here in Butte County, but over there. And I was making a living off my land. I was being a farmer and going to farmer's market and being the kale lady. And I figured, like, yeah, I really want to care for my land. I'm going to learn how to like care for it with fire. Yeah, I'll probably like get a book. And then I'll know how to do it, because that's how I've always learned how to do everything. It's like, you know, you just find the right book and then you're good. And fire really doesn't work that way. And I, you know, like all these years went by and I was like, oh wait, I still have no idea how to do this, and I have no idea who will show me how to do this, because it's not like I come from a family where any of us ever did this, and nor do any of my neighbors or anyone I have ever met. So I thought, well, if I'm just sitting here, I'm not going to figure out how to do it. So wouldn't it be cool if we could all just like, I can't be the only person who feels this way. So what if a bunch of us could get together and just like figure it out and learn from each other and find those few people who do know what they're doing, and like learn from them just as much as we can. And then like we could help each other burn. And you wouldn't have to be a landowner per se. You know, you could just be anybody in the community. I mean, I would totally go and burn somebody else's land if, you know, even if I didn't like own my own land or anything like that, anybody can do it. And I had never heard of anything like that, but it turns out there is something like that. Lately, it's called a prescribed burn association. And so that's where just people in a neighborhood, neighbors can get together and kind of, it's sort of like a barn raising or that sort of event where you kind of like go around and burn the land that needs to be burned. And, you know, the volunteer fire department might come out, Calfire might come out, different folks might come out. You can bring your kids. And the reason that that appealed to me so much was not just because, well, I mean, it met my needs as an individual, but also back when California's forests were resilient, you know, before the age of fire suppression, when Indigenous management was taking care of California. California, I mean, it wasn't California yet, but this land was a place where fire was the responsibility of just ordinary people. And there wasn't anybody who had no idea how to act around fire or had no idea how to ever possibly put fire on the ground. And it was just like, there's no way I could do that, right? It was just an expectation that that would be part of daily life, like washing the dishes or doing laundry. And after contact and as colonization progressed, there were still even communities of settlers where there was fire knowledge for a few generations. Like there's ranging traditions and logging traditions of using fire in California and across the West. And again, those were communities, maybe small communities, but there were places where fire was still considered to be everybody's responsibility, and it wasn't crazy to think that your kid would like help you go out and do a burn or something like that. And you know, people tell me all kinds of things. I know there's more of us now, everything's different now, but I don't understand why we can't just do that again. So I would like to really thank my bosses for allowing me to start a prescribed burn association. Nobody else is going to do it, but RCD for life. And so Butte County does have a prescribed burn association. It's not the only way that you can learn about fire or put fire on the ground. There's plenty of ways. If you have any relationship to land or know anyone who does, who controls land, you have the right to burn your land, and you don't need to sign up with the Resource Conservation District or anybody else to do it. I mean, you should probably talk to Calfire about it, but it is your right under, you know, certain conditions. But if you are like me and you'd like some company, we have a prescribed burn association here. We got some prescribed burn association members in the house. We've had several successful burns this spring where just ordinary folks were able to come out and burn ordinary properties up in Forest Ranch. And it was, I thought it was awesome. It was really fun for me and I learned a lot. And every burn that we do, I just can't even imagine how much I learned from each one. I feel like there are probably other things that I was going to say tonight, but that's really my central message. So everybody's welcome. There's a lot of there's so many dimensions to prescribed fire, and through, my organization works with the Forest Service and BLM, and of course, the CSU Chico Ecological Reserves up at Big Chico Creek, and probably out at Butte Creek soon, I don't know, but the reserves do so much amazing work with fire. The Mechoopda tribe is returning fire to its land, and the city of Chico Parks Division is doing fire in the parks now. So there's all these different levels, but for me, what is most magical to me is when ordinary people just take that fire knowledge back and build those skills together. So thanks for listening.
Thanks, Wolfie. When we do bring it back together, I think I might just hold this. When we bring it back together with all of our speakers, I do think it's important, and I'm sure that our other two speakers will speak to this too, is to talk about the concept of prescribed fire and fighting fire with fire in a way that's responsible and gives us that low intensity burn that's actually good for our ecosystem and helps reset the seed bed and bring nutrients back to the soil, and how that even feeds into our groundwater system. As opposed to these mega fires that we're seeing that are high intensity and that are sterilizing the soil and that are creating those hydrophobic soils that don't allow groundwater recharge. And so it's really important that we follow that tradition of ecological knowledge of getting into these lands and setting those low intensity fires like it was when those forests were resilient. So thank you for speaking on that topic. Our next speaker is Zeke Lunder. Zeke is a pyrogeographer, which is one of my favorite terms for a job description or job title. Wildfire analyst and manager. Zeke has been working as a geographer on wildfire and forestry projects since 1995 and has been certified as a wildland fire manager by the Association for Fire Ecology. Zeke grew up down the road from where I did. Zeke's from the mountains too, up in Westwood. And I have to just ahead of time thank Zeke so much for being on top of the Dixie Fire and giving updates to the community. If you didn't know Zeke's name already, you probably do now if you've been following the Dixie Fire. The maps that come out are complex, and he does a really good job breaking them down for us. So Zeke, want to come on up and give your talk?
All right, thanks for the introduction. It's nice to be back in the amphitheater. I bought my first bag of heroin right behind that tree over there. I think I'm joking. Yeah, I went to Chico State for geography and mapping, and then during college I was working for the Forest Service back at home, and we were marking trees for thinning out in the area around Butte Lake. It's burning right now. And the idea was kind of that because we didn't have enough fire, that we could go around and use machines and cut down all the small trees that fire would kill. So I kind of got in this mode of walking around the woods thinking like I was fire. I'm like, all right, I'd kill that one, I'd kill that one. But you had to kill the trees in a pattern that a machine could kind of fit through the woods and cut them. So, so it's interesting now. I spent a lot of time up in Lassen County walking around thinking about fire. And I thought, every time I go out, I'm like, well, this will probably burn at some point. That'll be interesting. Yeah, that'll probably burn, and wonder, maybe we'll get to burn that before it burns, And now it's all burned in like a month, like all that, like 800,000 acres. That's grew up in Westwood, live in Chico. Everything in my world basically just burned. Everything in my territory, all this land that I know best. So I guess that uniquely prepares me to be the journalist. But it's hard to take. But on the other hand, a lot of that land got good fire. So we talked a lot about good fire, bad fire. I mean, the only thing that's good about good fire is that it makes someone happy for some reason, right? Like, there's not a kind of scientific definition of what good fire is. For the last 2 years, I've been working on a project for 800,000 acres between the Feather River and the Dalby up to
I got you a salad. Thank you. Do you like my new workplace?
700,000 acres that just burned, right? Of that 800,000. And the idea of that project was, where should we go to thin that forest or burn it? Where are the places that are the highest priority for us to focus on getting good fire back on the ground or using machines to thin the forest. And when we started it, so I've been writing fire plans for 20 years, and in that time, things have just gotten worse and worse and worse, and these plans don't really change anything. So there was a grant to do this work, and we got hired, and I told the guy who had the money, you know, this is all going to burn before we ever do any of this. And he's an academic and excited about process, and he said, well, I'm more optimistic than you. Well, it just all burned, all of it. So I can see some victories in that some of these roadless areas that burned, we were never going to be able to burn them anyway, and they're not completely destroyed. Some of it burned a lot hotter than I would ever want to see it burn, but we kind of knew that was going to happen because the Forest Service can talk all day about thinning, and Cal-Fire can commit that they're going to thin 1 million acres a year when they're achieving 12,000 or something. So 1 million acres is a lot of work. You know, we had 6,000 firefighters on the Dixie Fire, and it was 600,000 acres. And we're just working around the edges of it. You know, but we've had people out there for a month working around the edge, 6,000 people working around the edges of this fire. That's 600,000 acres. So when we talk about like managing 1 million acres a year, it's just not going to happen, right? Like, we're going to have fires and they're going to burn land, and we can talk about scaling up, scale with our thinning and our protection, but it's not going to happen. Like, we have to kind of acknowledge the scale of the problem and our scale as a species, and it's folly. The folly that we think that we can manage forest land is kind of the first problem we've got. You know, we think that we can affect the outcome of the ecology of the entire state. You know, and so we've done a really good job at keeping fire off of most of California for 100 years, but like we're totally outmatched now. Climate change and fire kind of join forces, and like fire just like it's kicking our asses everywhere we look. You know, Dixie Fire, jump this 𝗕𝗥𝗘𝗔𝗞 line and run. Oh, okay, well, we're going to come and we're going to light 30 miles of this road as our strategy, and then that turns into a 20-mile wide head fire when the wind blows, right? So a friend of mine asked me the other day, he said, what do you think if we just like took and ran a computer model of the Dixie Fire and just let it burn? Do you think that it would have burned 800,000 acres? Like, no way. Maybe it would have burned 300,000 or 400,000. But like in our kind of desire to get out there and get ahead of it, like everything that we do in this reactive mode is just kind of making the problem worse. So it's kind of tough to sell good fire right now. You know, my brother lives in Greenville. He lives outside of town, so his house didn't burn down, but you know, his whole town burned down. And it's tough having watched Campfire, the recovery process of these huge corporations coming in, cutting down all the trees that aren't dead yet. Watching people struggle with FEMA, watching all this struggle. It's really tough to see Greenville now facing that. And it seems like now that we know that the kind of the double tragedy of these fires, that's a hard thing about it. So I'm not flying the good fire banner real high right now. I am optimistic in that, in some ways, we did get some good fire out of this. We got a lot of bad fire, but these lands that we're talking about that have been affected, they've been really fucked up for 100 years. It's not like we can just turn a switch tomorrow. And you know, I think of like there's this multi-generational thing of the problems we're facing, where you know, if you have 7 generations in your family with alcohol abuse and physical abuse and emotional abuse, like it's not like tomorrow everyone's just gonna like go to therapy for a couple weeks and then like be happy, productive citizens. And the forests and the ecosystems, they're all the same. You know, we've got such a long chain of mistakes and arrogance and disconnection that fire is kind of the only reset button that is at our disposal. So all these.
I was going to walk at September.
It's terrible. I feel terrible for all my forester friends who spent their whole careers trying to grow trees for Palms pine and trying to do the right thing and really thinking all the time about this future structure of the forest. And this is devastating for them because now it's all just totally gone. It's just going to be a big haircut and tree planting. unwilling to use fire. You know, and that's what happens when you put lawyers in charge. You know, when you put risk managers at the top of the board of the organization, and they say, hey, if the fire gets away, we're going to get a huge fine from the Forest Service. So we've got a huge part of the problem is just that the legal context in which fire happens. And a lot of that's unintended consequences from past things that have happened. Sierra Pacific Industries started a big fire. The railroad started a big fire, the Story Fire. They got a $100 million fine for damaging the watershed. And so it's just created this environment where the timber companies know that all the old loggers used to burn, and fire has always been a huge part of forestry and forest culture, but we've taken away the torches. And that's the only tool we have to really fire save the forests. You know, thinning is great. And I think as environmentally minded people, we have to really avoid these kind of national scale politics, where the Sierra Club says, oh, logging's bad, or biomass doesn't test well for carbon, or, you know, there's all these excuses that the environmental community uses to fight what they perceive as moves to grab more logging from public lands. And that has really, you know, made the environmental community toothless, really, and as far as responding to this, you know, as soon as we talk about thinning the forest, then we've got national environmentalists saying, oh no, this is just a ploy to grab more logging out of the woods. And let's invent a bunch of science that then supports that. So we're seeing this already on the Dixie Fire of like, well, look, logging, this was all logged and it burned, so therefore logging is bad. Logging is a huge part of what we need to do to restore forests. Like, in part because we need to support the local economies in a way that people can afford to live in Greenville and Chester, and that you have a workforce that can actually go out and burn. So these complex kind of social, economic, environmental issues overlapping, like they defy this kind of national environmental movement. So we have to be local, I think, and kind of call bullshit on that, you know, and really deal with the problem as a whole community, and not just, oh, the loggers just want to take more wood. It's like, it's so much more complicated than that. The economics of it don't even support that idea, you know. So we've got these broken national systems, national scale problems with the national forest. We've got the broken kind of local scale problems with the liability. And then we've got the culture of firefighting that is wanting to paint all the fires bad and destructive. And so last year we had 4 million acres burned in California. And every time we hit a new million, there was like national media came to town and wanted to do interviews on like the most devastating wildfire season ever. So that's what happens. You got a 1 million acre fire, national press comes. You got 1 million acres burned total, national press comes. 2 million, hey, they're coming down again. 4 million, wow, yeah, we're back again in California for another story on the biggest fire season ever. But no one talks about like the 3/4 of the burning that happened last year was beneficial for California, right? Like, and that's what happens in general with fires. Like, even a lot of our big timber fires, it's like only 30% maybe is high severity and kills all the trees. But no one talks about that. They say, oh, 1 million acres burned. I look at that and I say, yeah, man, we just treated 750,000 acres of fire resilient ecosystems in California. You know, that's a fucking success. And Campfire talk about like, hey, how can we treat 1 million acres? Like, well, you just fucking did. Right? So it's like, it's so much of its language. Like, how do we turn the script? Like, when we burned up the Campfire, it fucking sucks for all of us. And we're all going to be scarred for life by that. But, you know, and then I'm not going to trot around and say like, yeah, but the oaks are fucking stoked, you know? But Butte County, like, pretty much anytime when we burn the park, then there's this op-ed in the Chico News and Review, like criticizing the city council for letting the park burn. It's like, I want to criticize the city council for putting out all the fucking fires in the park for the last 100 years, right? So like, how do we change that story to where we love fire for the good it's doing and we get out of its fucking way, right? Like Cohasset, like we can spend $10 million trying to fire save Cohasset, trying to come in and like help people clear all the wood that they don't want to cut down so you can't see their pot plants from the road. It's going to burn anyway. And so like, let's acknowledge that. Like, firefighting is no longer saving these towns. It's not going to save Forest Ranch. We can do all the burning we want, and hopefully we'll save a lot of places and we'll convert them to more resilient oak forests. But we shouldn't be fooled into thinking that, you know, firefighting is working anymore. And we should be thinking about building, maybe digging in like our hobbit holes or something, you know, like but really acknowledge that, like, hey man, these places grow 15 pounds of vegetation per acre per year, right? Like, unless you've got a full-time squad of 20 people working for you on your 10 acres, you're not going to keep up. And so we can burn it, and we can make our zones around our homes more resilient, or we can adapt to climate change by retreating from places that are the most hammered, right? The timber companies are bailing out of Concal because they know there's no way they're ever going to grow 50-year-old tree in Concal without burning it up. Because that's a climate change adaptation. So as far as us adapting to climate change, like, well, let's retreat from the box canyon that we built our little wood shack in. Let's not live there anymore. Or if we're going to live there, let's build something where firefighters don't have to risk their life to save it, right? And one note on Wolfie's work, the TVA is great. And burning, it's like we need a culture of burning. How many people have been a Burning Man? So fire brings people together in a way that nothing else can, right? So burning piles, even in town, in your yard, a little stealth, keep it below the fence. But unless we build this culture back around the love of fire, like, if you're going to live out in the woods in a place that can burn, you need to get good at fire. You need to be burning your piles, you need to be burning your yard. Otherwise, you shouldn't live there because it's fire's home, right? And coming in there and be like, oh, we're going to keep fire out here. Like, no, it's just not working, right? So, cultural thing. And I had something else to say about the TVA. It'll come back to you before the Q&A. So, thanks everyone for being interested.
Okay, good, it's on. Thank you so much, Zeke. Next up, we have our final speaker, and we'll follow that with a Q&A, of course. So our final speaker of the night is Dr. Don Hankins, Professor of Geography and Planning at Chico State, Field Director at CSU Chico Ecological Reserves, and co-lead of the Intertribal Indigenous Stewardship Project. Don's experience includes pyrogeography, water resources, conservation, planning, and Indigenous stewardship, and considering landscape scale, biodiversity, and resilience. So come on up here and tell us more about yourself and your work, Don. Thank you so much.
Good evening. It's kind of awkward to be here in front of everybody today because this is the very first public event that I've been at in over a year and a half.
Wow.
So
Thank you.
thanks, Kaitlyn, for the invite. And yeah, this is, there's so much to say. I mean, I'm following a long list of great presentations. And I guess the one thing to kind of, add to the intro is that, and Zeke kind of this is the culture of fire side of it. And that I am a Newark person from the Delta, and I come from a culture of fire. And when I hear people talking about fire and the fear of fire that folks have, my ancestors stewarded the landscape in a way that Wolfie was talking about and Zeke was talking about that is so different than the experience that we are all having right now. And one thing that Zeke said, just to kind of pull that conversation in, kind of resonated with me, was thinking about the 7 generations of trauma that people might undergo. And when I think about all these fires and everywhere that I've traveled this summer, which is pretty limited because once we started seeing so many fires happening within our landscape around, I stopped going anywhere, and I haven't really gone anywhere to begin with. But Father's Day weekend, I went out to north of Reno off Red Rock Road. And as I'm driving, I see fire everywhere that I go. I can't help but see fire everywhere. The fire history in the landscape, the places that I would set fire, the way that fire would move through that place. Because that's the way that I've been trained to think about the landscape. And as it turns out, we see fire then a couple weeks later burning across and people are being evacuated off of Red Rock Road, where the last fire that was in that area was in 1999. And then, the Dixie Fire. And I started thinking about places, and Zeke kind of alluded to this too, going up this past December and looking at areas in the forest and thinking, I was telling Wolfie this earlier, that this past December, I thought, I would love to light off from Humboldt Summit along Jones Creek down to Jonesville. And so I wish that I would have done that and not been, you know, if I was able to do it, not to be an arsonist and not to be a felon by doing it on federal land. There happened to be a Calfire truck down the road that day too, and I was kind of hoping, well, maybe I'd see some smoke coming up, but no, that wasn't the case. So as I think about all these fires that are burning across the West from, you know, not only here in California, but going all the way up into BC, I think about all the communities that I've worked with over the years, people with the Salish communities up there who've been trying to bring Indigenous fire back to protect their homelands, to protect their landscapes. And sadly, what I'm seeing is that people's homelands are being lost. That all that's familiar is being lost. And what I see is that this is going to continue to perpetuate that trauma that people have from settlement, to be removed from the land, to have policies that have been put in place to keep people from stewarding those places. Because every single one of these places has an Indigenous community that is working to bring fire back. I think about the 𝗕𝙀 Summit Consortium and some of the great burns that they've been doing in Humbug Valley and in other places. They're not to the scale that would change the difference on this fire. But in time, they would hope to build that. In time, the Washoe tribe would hope to do that. My own community now with the Calder fire in the Upper Cosumnes watershed, we had mapped out 30,000 acres of places that we wanted to burn. Maybe we'll get to burn some of that at some point. But these are the kind of things that we need to be doing and we need to be thinking about. And we can't just keep sitting around on our laurels and writing plans and hoping that things will change. So, you know, we come from a culture of fire, and our culture has created landscapes that were resistant to the effects of climate change. And when we think about the past wet periods and the dry periods and all these things going back for thousands and thousands of years, the one thing that's a constant was fire. And people were always using fire, but that tool was taken away from us with settlement colonial policy. And so when we think about early Spanish settlement in California, we see this policy coming in that forbids Indigenous people from burning. We see that then continuing with the fire suppression policies themselves. And yes, there are people who were burning here and there, as Wolfie alluded to, with ranching communities and so forth being able to do that. But Indigenous people specifically were forbidden from doing that. And I think we're, you know, and people recognize, oh, the Indians used to burn over there. Like they used to burn in the high country at the end of the, you know, at the end of this summer season, as they're coming back down from the mountain, they light it off. And I heard those stories from my elders growing up. And their stories from their elders were that if we ever stop burning, we're going to have wildfires that are going to be rampant. And we have these stories that also tell us that in the time before we started burning, these fires were large. And so when I first saw the campfire on the day when it was burning through Paradise, driving down Highway 32 to come down here, which I ended up turning around and going home and packing up stuff because I got evacuated just like Kaitlyn. It was first fire story. You know, so we are experiencing the first fire story. And this story is not just local to here, it's a global thing with Indigenous communities that are in fire-prone areas. There are these stories that tell us about how to steward the land. And so when I think about that, you know, how do we then start to rebuild that? How do we think about the ability to restore the landscape? And as I've been sitting up in the back, I think about this beautiful creek here, and I think about my own kind of research. You know, I've been burning since I was like 9 or sometime maybe younger than that, doing fireworks and things like that. But I started to officially study fire in my graduate years, and I'm always thinking about the connections to biodiversity, and that's the tool that we're going to use to conserve species. You know, when we see the biodiversity decline globally, I see fire needs to be put in places to protect that biodiversity. So I study riparian systems. That was my graduate research. And, you know, I think about that. I've been watching that whole hillside there and thinking, man, wouldn't that be fantastic this fall if we ever get rain again? I'm hoping we get rain. And that starts to green up in that weedy grass there. We can come down here and get the license, hopefully get some 𝗕𝗥𝗘𝗔𝗞 tribe members to come down here and light this thing off with me.
Right, with a full amphitheater.
With a full amphitheater. And people can come walk over there and stand next to these little fires, right? We're not too far off from that. I will say that campus is now actually talking about having the places for us to be able to do that. I see Ursula back there from the Air Quality District. See me out a little bit. You know, give us the right to burn in Chico, right? That would fulfill something that was asked to me when I came to my interview at Chico State almost 16 years ago. Would I burn in Chico? Why wouldn't I burn in Chico? If you give me the right to do it, I'll do it. So, you know, like things are obviously out of whack. We've changed things around quite a bit, and you know, obviously we're all suffering from it. I live in Forest Ranch. I live in that place for a specific reason, because I wanted to raise my kids in a place where they could have a connection to nature. And for the past few years, as wildfire season rolls around, I think, oh, should I pack up? I'm packed up right now. I'm looking out of boxes for the most part. Half my house is in Durham, at a friend's house who I evacuated to in the Campfire. It's kind of a weird situation to be in. I feel like a climate refugee. I guess I am. But why I moved to it, knowing that it's a place that never has had no large fires in over 100 years on Domo Ridge, was that I wanted to be able to start bringing fire back in. Because I know that if I start that place to bring the fire back in, and we get it to the right scale, then while fire is always going to be there, we change the effects of that fire. We change the behavior of that fire, and that forest will be there. And I've talked to my wife recently about this and said, look, if our house burns down, I feel for the most part, this year's kind of iffy because it's kind of, you know, very drought stressed, but I feel like our forest is still going to be there. That's really, I think, my responsibility in living in that place is to make sure the forest is going to be there, so that Scrub Day has a place to come in and have its place, and the April woodpeckers, everybody has a place. But you have to know that place. You have to know how to steward it. You have to think about the connections of all those species and the responsibilities of those species in order to do that.
Nice.
So in terms of, I guess, some of the more positive sides of things, kind of the optimistic, and I always try to be the optimistic guy, you know, like all these people called, like Zeke and I would always get hit by the media. And, you know, they always tell me, you sound like one of the most optimistic people around this whole fire thing. And I'm like, I have to be, because I'd probably not be here if I wasn't optimistic about it, right? But we have to start to make that change. This past year has brought about a huge, you know, change for the way that I've lived. I've had the opportunity to engage, as I was introduced, with the Indigenous Intertribal Stewardship Project, which is an intertribal initiative happening right now in the state of California. I'm co-lead for that project. And the intent of it is to bring indigenous fire back across the state. We often hear about the work that the Fruit tribe and the Yurok tribe are doing up on the Klamath River, but it's happening everywhere. There's folks down in San Diego County who are burning on their lands. And when I say their lands, you know, it's not just the little postage stamps of rancheria lands and reservation lands and things like that. California is a unique place in that we don't have treaties with tribes in the state. So therefore, everything in the state is still tribal land, which is pretty interesting to think about. So when you think about like self-determination rule and the right to burn, nobody ever relinquished that right. But nobody at this point in time wants to push the limits on that. No tribe, no individual wants to mess it up for anybody else. So what I'm currently doing through that project is asking agencies like the Forest Service, hey, why don't you give me 20,000 acres to go play in? Let's show you that we can do this. We can use fire to restore places. We can use it without mechanical thinning. It's first entry burn. There are prescriptions we have within our knowledge system to restore these places. Let us start doing it. I'm waiting for them to give me the land. I've got some local lands around here that I have in mind. One of them happens to be East Wilderness. And go for it.
Nice.
Right? Let's do it. So, you know, those are some of the things that are there. We've got multiple programs happening within the state to support burning. Capacity building happens to be one of the biggest pieces of it. With the PBAs, like Wolfie was talking about, there's a need for capacity. People need to be trained. On the tribal side, people haven't been able to practice that in such a long time that they need to be trained. So with the Regional Fire and Forest Capacity Grant Program through the Department of Conservation, we're starting to get funding to do that and build that capacity. And that's, you know, it's going to be a slow process, but hopefully we can start to scale it up. And then we've got, you know, various other things, positive things happening within our state legislation right now. Changes within what is liabilities for burning. In specific, if you want to look it up, SB 332 and AB 642 are two pieces of legislation that will back not only prescribe burning, but also have language in it to include cultural burning and defining what that is, so that the state can start to recognize it and give the place for indigenous people to come back and steward the landscape. There's also connected with that funding for providing kind of a kitty, or if somebody lit a fire and it got too big, but see kind of the planned area for burning, which if you're burning in the right time, is pretty limited opportunity for that spread to happen. But would create a fund for mitigating civil penalties. So those are some really important things. There's a lot of work that's taking place around coastal burning. A lot of the work we've been doing on the ecological reserve started with coastal burning as the main guide for that, doing 200 to 300 acres per year. This year, we're not only doing a mix of that coastal burning, but doing Trex burning, which is a training exchange program. And some Zeke and Wolfie and I are all involved in kind of planning for that. So that'll be coming this fall, hopefully winter. We'll see what happens. We need the wet season first. And then there's just other examples like that. So there's optimistic opportunities I think that are there for us to be thinking about it. And I guess one kind of message I would say, that if we want to start thinking about changing behavior, it's not only about having that relationship with fire, but also thinking about the benefits of this past year. As I'm hearing all these motorcycles and cars drive around here, I pretty much went the whole last year without driving anywhere. I think I put maybe 4,000 miles on my truck, because I'm like, so far out in the woods, it takes me 20 miles to get down to Chico. But I used to do like 25,000 miles a year. And I think about the carbon footprint of that. And this past summer, I think I kind of just came to the realization, like, look, if you don't believe in climate change, like, just look around. Look at what's happening in the ocean, look at what's happening in our forests. Like, we've got to start making change somewhere. So I'm hoping to do a lot less driving and only drive when I need to set fire somewhere. So I'll close with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're gonna have a Q&A here. So our past three panelists, you can ask them some questions, and folks who are on the Zoom, you can type your questions in the chat, and we'll read them out loud if we have time. We've got about 10 minutes for this Q&A, so let's start. Anybody in the audience who want to raise your hand and ask a question? All right, I see somebody back there. I'll repeat it back.
Yeah, I was just wondering, can you say those policies again, the policy numbers, and are they like going to be on the ballot? Or they already passed? What's the deal with that?
Yeah, so the question was, what are the two state policies that are sitting in legislation currently? So SB 332, sponsored by Dodd. That actually, I got news today, is actually being moved to Assembly for review. So it's passed Senate. There's no opposition to it, so don't write any opposition to that. And then the other one is SB 642 by Friedman. And I forget where that was at. We're working on a lot of policy kind of stuff this past year too. Yeah. Thank you.
Do you have any Zoom questions?
Yes.
Read us the Zoom questions, Becky.
Dawn, can you speak to the impacts of exporting millions of acre feet from the Feather River watershed with respect to burn severity throughout the watershed?
Yeah.
Or reword it the way you want to answer it.
I'm trying to like understand this. I think maybe it's better for Sandrine to think about it in terms of the water, but exporting, trying to draw the relationship between the export of 1 million acre feet of water from the Feather River to fire severity. There's a lot of different ways that I can answer that. I mean, as a geographer, I think about all these different connections. I think one thing that's really important to think about is how with high fire severity, you're going to have potential for a lot more flashiness to that system and vulnerability to the facility at Rougle or the reservoir. It's not natural. But those kind of things are going to make it more kind of vulnerable to stochastic events, rainfall events, and so forth. So it may, we may get enough rainfall this year to fill it up pretty quickly. And then it could go dry again. Then there's also like the sediment impacts and those kind of things. So we could be losing storage in the reservoir itself. But in like lower severity, mixed severity zone, you have a lot more capacity to be able to store water in that system. But then also with snowpack, you can when you have snowpack, you actually have greater residency time of that snow in that place too. It allows for groundwater recharge, which is part of the problem why we're having some issues with right now too. Thank you.
Who has a question? Oh, I see a couple of hands. How about you?
So I've been doing a lot of research on prescribed grazing and how it compares to fire. One of the things that stood out to me was when you graze, you lose kinds of nutrients for the soil, while when you burn, the fuels go up in the atmosphere. And I was wondering if any of the speakers had any opinions or anything that I'm missing on what fire can do that grazing might not, and comparing contrast.
So the question was about the benefits of grazing versus burning, I believe. And I was thinking maybe if multiple speakers want to address this, if they both have the opportunity. So come on up, whoever's here.
I'll take a first swing at it, and maybe Wolfie will join me. But if you want to go out and look at Bidwell Park right now, and here on Manzanita Park, Manzanita Drive, and that area going into the park, there's a good opportunity, I think, to kind of see the opportunity that's being missed between fire and grazing. So grazing or fire itself, in terms of how it's burning, what the intensity of the fire is, really kind of gets to how much nutrient cycling is happening. So a lower intensity fire is actually going to cycle those nutrients closer on the local level. And I don't know the comparisons of what you're looking at in terms of nutrients, but that's the kind of fire that's actually going to cycle that back into the system, and also provide for the biochar that Sandrine talked about. So those kind of benefits. The thing that grazing doesn't do is remove ladder fuels very well. It doesn't take out the woody kind of material that's left. If you kind of look around this area here, what would carry fire up in the canopy of the trees. And having just spent a little bit of time up in Upper Park this afternoon, that was one thing I really noticed, is that, well, they did a good job of, goats did a good job of taking out the pine tools on the ground, but the fire would have done a nice job to prune those trees up so that when there is another fire, that we don't lose those trees. So that's kind of my talk, my thinking points on it. Hope you want to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Burned areas are very fertile. So if there's one thing that people take away from this, I want it to be that when a fire goes through, especially a lower intensity fire, the nutrients do not primarily go up into the atmosphere. They primarily stay on the soil as ash, which is an amazing fertilizer, and as biochar, also known as charcoal, which is an incredibly stable, centuries to millennia scale, stable form of carbon that we desperately need more of on our soil. So if fires year after year after year, or year after 2 years, after 3 years, after 3 years, 10 years, or whatever, if regular fire didn't have the ability to leave behind an increasingly fertile and productive landscape, then we wouldn't have one in California. We wouldn't have meadows that just have feet of solid carbon that are incredibly productive. Ranchers and loggers would never have adopted fire as a land management technique. The reason that they did so was because even though, okay, if you burn off a pasture, maybe your animals can't graze it that very year, but the next year that forage is so incredibly nutritious, and that's because of the nutrient cycling job that fire has done. Oh, thank you. Yeah, Geneva also mentioned that fire has pest management functions. So smoke is a fumigant and a purifier of sorts. So one of the many, many reasons that Indigenous people would use smoke deliberately, especially in oak woodlands, was because they were really taking advantage of the amazing oak bounty that they had cultivated in California. And if you're gathering acorns every year, if you don't burn underneath those oak trees for a few years, the pests just really build up, and the mold and the blights and the little worms and everything. And if you send fire underneath the oaks every few years. You know, that smoke goes up in the canopy as well as through the ground. And Dawn could say this so much better than I can, but it helps more of those oak seeds be, you know, viable and nutritious each year. Sometimes when we're burning out on somebody's like forest land, you'll be just kind of walking along and there'll be a soft tap on your shoulder and there's little caterpillars just falling out of the pine trees. Just kind of cool.
Just one thing to add on grazing versus burning is that it's kind of, they're both good for, from a kind of operational standpoint. So one of the big obstacles we have to burning in the urban interface is people are worried that we're going to burn down their house. So if we can graze heavily, it's a really low risk way of reducing the fuels. And then we can follow up by burning, you know, so if we can graze really heavily within, you know, 200 feet of people's houses, then we can run a hotter fire out a little farther away without this concern about burning up their house.
I have a Zoom question.
Okay, we have time for one more question. So Zoom question.
Okay, Susan Cheaty. It's way up here. It's for Wolfie or for Zeke or for anybody who wants to answer it. What technologies are coming for fighting fire or dealing with fire? What new technologies that are coming that you're aware of and can share with us?
What a softball. So someone asked me this on Twitter the other day, so I've already got an answer. But the question is, what new technologies do we have that can help us deal with fire better? And I think we don't need new technologies. We've got Stone Age technologies that are the best tools we've got. And so we should be looking backwards to how fire has been managed in the past, not to the future, because we clearly don't get it.
Kind of running into the end of the forum time, but we want. Yeah, you can jump in. Wait, Kaitlyn.
Kind of what happens when you have two MCs. So the goal here is to bring our speakers back together to give everybody one last chance to share with our audience, you know, the takeaway message, you know, closing remarks, but really that call to action for anybody who's listening in or watches this later. It'll be posted to our YouTube channel, the Environmental Council's YouTube channel. But I know there's a lot of important people, even just here, that are doing good things in our communities with their different organizations. And so I just want you all to hear this at the same time, and for the general community, not just here in Chico or Butte County, but really the surrounding region, to know that all of our organizations do have the capacity to combine forces and to get every single resident, you know, out into these lands to help manage. It's not just up to homeowners. It's not just up to property owners. It really is a human problem. It's an us problem, and we all really need to contribute in resetting this vicious cycle that we're in. So I'm really excited that everybody was able to join us today, and I'm really grateful for our speakers here as well. So yeah, if there's not any more super pressing questions, I think I'll just open the floor to our speakers one more time.
What?
Last closing remark and call to action, and then we'll do our close.
Yeah, fire is the best teacher. So I encourage all of you and your friends to come out and burn with us. As soon as we have enough moisture that we can not start the next big sea fire. There's a lot of projects we already have lined up. We're going to be putting on, working with Wolfie and Dawn and people from Hayfork and a bunch of other people who are involved. We're putting on a prescribed fire training exchange here over the winter. We're looking for opportunities to burn people's land. So if you know people who have got land in Forest Ranch or Cohasset, especially places with black oak and pine woods, we're going to be burning, and anyone can come, any sort of fitness. we'll find a way for you to experience fire. Bring your kids, bring the pitchfork.
Yay.
Well, I echo that for sure. There's always an opportunity, and I think what Kaitlyn was mentioning too, there's a real opportunity for folks to help out. I was thinking about it on the ride over here earlier today. There's roughly 40 million people living in the state of California, and roughly 100 million acres within the state. So if we all kind of banded together and everybody took a little bit of land, we could really do some good work. And I think about folks that are living up in the foothills that maybe need help. They don't know what to do. So take the information you got today and share that. I know that there are people who think that the forest should be super dense where they live and right up against their houses and so forth. And there's a saying in the fire community that, particularly for home protection, that your place is only safe with your neighbors. Help out, right?
Yeah, we need more boots or just shoes, just closed-toed shoes. Basically. If you're just an ordinary person with no fire training, you can't necessarily go and burn on you can't join a Forest Service burn. There's a lot of burns that you can't join, although the training to get qualified to do that is actually not that inaccessible. And through the treks that Zeke and Don are talking about, you can acquire that training and you can become part of the Citizens Burn Corps that goes out and burns on Forest Service and BLM land. But even before that, you can come and join those community burns on private lands where there's really no entry barrier. Ages 9 and up for Butte PVA burns anyway. And so to find out about, at least from me, about when those burns are, find out about treks, start just learning about the good fire opportunities that are just out in the neighborhoods in Butte County. You can just Google Butte PVA and you can email goodfire@bcrcd.org. That's goodfire@bcrcd.org. And I'll put you on our mailing list. I hope to be hearing a lot more about opportunities to develop a good relationship with fire over the coming months and years.
All right, so I'm going to bring us back to water because I'm starstruck here with these fire experts. And my one call to action is to think about your runoff, think about your water use. So it all relates to water, obviously, and it all comes down to water. Not all. Water is a big part of fire too. So if you are a property owner, you can think of how your landscape generates runoff or not. And more water you keep on your land, the better your land's gonna fare. And you can collect your rooftop water. It's legal to do that, and you can put that back in your landscape. We're just living in Chico, and we were able to use our, even in this really dry year, we watered our landscape until last week, something like that. So it's great. And then if you don't have landscape to manage, if you're in Denton County, Chico, or pick up your water use. The reason this creek is dry at the other end of campus is that a lot of groundwater pumping will disconnect the creek. I mean, will draw the creek water in the ground, right? So let's all drink water too.
All right, as the sun has set behind us, I want to just acknowledge that we have a survey. The Environmental Council tries to get as much community feedback as possible because we are a grassroots organization. Our charge is to protect and defend the land, air, and water of Butte County and the surrounding region through education, advocacy, and action. And to me, action is stewardship. And like I said, we have all these connections to different agencies and organizations in the region. And so it's my anticipation to, continue to put the education out there for our community and how everybody can get involved with these different organizations. Zeke just started a blog called The Lookout. His website's great, very informational. Donations are appreciated for that project. Butte County Fire Safe Council has a donation page. Beck has a donation page. All of us are doing what we can with the resources we have, and limiting resource is money and volunteer time. So that's my call to action. And I'm just really appreciative that you all could make it out tonight. And those of you who joined us on Zoom, thank you so much for joining in. Please share this information with everybody. These fires really do affect us from the air we breathe to our groundwater, and our groundwater is really at risk from the future of the direction that the fires are going in our watershed. So just in closing, to thank our sponsors, Chico, Naturopathic Medicine, Clean Canteen, and the Strong Family Foundation for helping make this possible. Kevin Killian for doing our sound today. Thank you. Chico Unified School District provided the projection equipment. And City of Chico has the Bidwell Bowl on their list of places to beautify because we keep coming back to use this space. I also want to acknowledge that we are on the Chico tribal land, and so just keep that in mind anytime you're walking through Chico. Anything else I need to add? No? All right, thanks for coming. If you didn't get a chance to grab a survey, there's a paper survey you can fill out. It's also online if you want to save some paper. The link, you can ask Miranda at the top. She'll let you know what the link is, and it'll be on our social media pages and all that good stuff.
Thank you so much.
Right on.